I said earlier that Shabbat is a time where we're supposed to find absolute joy. And I must admit, I'm having a little difficulty after this week, after looking towards Israel, where our hearts long, the direction that we pray towards at every service. And I've been seeing what's been happening, and I must admit, I'm having a little trouble finding joy tonight. As much as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would like to go down in history as the prime minister who stands above the rest, he is the longest-serving prime minister in all of Israeli history, in my eyes, he will never measure up to Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin, for me, was someone who was larger than life and was a tremendous force for peace in the world. It was not just how he spoke about peace that made him a towering figure, but it was how he came to his position on peace that gave his words such weight. He was a soldier turned politician, a commander in the 1948 War of Independence. He was the victorious chief of staff during the 1967 war. He was a serial defense minister whose nickname was Mr. Security. No, for most of his political career, Rabin was no dove. In 1988, he ordered Israeli troops to put down the First Intifada by breaking the bones of stone-throwing Palestinian protesters. But his position slowly evolved. He came to see Palestinian resistance not as a military threat to be crushed, but as a political grievance requiring resolution. When the Oslo talks suggested a broad agreement might be possible, he faced a choice: to keep fighting or find a different way. People followed him to the signing of the accords because of his hawkish credentials. Israelis saw him as a man they could trust with the nation's defenses. So when he declared it was time to agree to an accommodation with the Palestinians, Israelis were prepared to listen. But not all of them. The moment the ink was dry on the Oslo Accords, the Israeli right, and especially the settlers of the West Bank and Gaza, denounced them as treachery. That intensified as Palestinian groups like Hamas and the Islamic Jihad registered their own opposition to Oslo by detonating suicide bombs in Israel, blowing up buses and killing scores of civilians. As this happened, Rabin was condemned for betraying his own people. At anti-government rallies, protesters carried placards showing a photoshopped Rabin wearing Arafat's distinctive keffiyeh or in a Nazi uniform. The then leader of the opposition was Benjamin Netanyahu and was the star speaker at two now infamous demonstrations where the crowd's slogans included "Death to Rabin." In July of 1995, Netanyahu walked at the head of a mock funeral procession featuring a fake black coffin. Israel's head of internal security pleaded with Netanyahu to dial down the rhetoric, warning that the prime minister's life was in danger. As you can imagine, Netanyahu said no. Perhaps he, like Rabin, couldn't imagine an Israeli Jew would ever kill one of their own. But I think that's being too kind to Netanyahu. And as you all know, Rabin was killed by one of his own, a fanatical believer who thought he heard the voice of God confirming what the mobs were shouting, and he killed Rabin because of a religious belief that he was saving the soul of Israel, when in reality he killed it. Immediately following Rabin's death, people at his vigil were squarely putting the blame on Netanyahu, shouting slogans like, "Bibi, you killed him." I don't think it was Netanyahu's agenda to get Rabin killed. I think Netanyahu was just thinking about what Netanyahu always thinks about: himself and his own power. While being your rabbi, there have been times when I have been critical of the policies of Israel that have affected us as Reformed Jews. I have called out the government of Israel when they have marginalized women, whether on buses or at the Kotel, as they try to pray to God and are accosted not only by the ultra-Orthodox, but also by the police. I have lambasted the government when they've turned away from agreements on how the Western Wall would be used equally by all Jews, and I've spoken out when the government has treated the non-Jewish residents as second-class citizens. But very rarely, if at all, have I called out any Israeli politicians by name from this bima. I've only spoken about policies at large and how it has affected us as Reformed Jews, or how we as Reformed Jews can view the power and significance of what Israel is or could be, and how important it is that Israel is in our lives. That is not what I will be doing tonight. Because as a Jew and as a rabbi, when I look at the moral behavior of Netanyahu and his racist, misogynistic, homophobic, and bigoted cronies that he put in seats of power, I am only filled with sorrow, shame, and rage. This is a tale of reverse Dayenu. Dayenu meaning it would have been enough. If Netanyahu had only put racists like Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich in seats of power, but hadn't acted on their fanaticism, Dayenu, it would have been enough. But he upped the ante and started putting legislative reforms in place that could change the very fabric of Israeli life and how you and I, as non-Orthodox Jews, could be treated and accepted in Israeli society. If he had only put forth those legislative reforms and had not turned hoses and tear gas on the protesters, Dayenu would have been enough. But even still, what he is doing is horrible. A few weeks ago, Maddie Friedman, Daniel Gordis, and Yossi Klein Halevi wrote an op-ed entitled An Open Letter to Israel's Friends in North America. In it, they summarized these reforms in the following ways. In their own words, Israel's government is moving to eviscerate the independence of our judiciary and remake the country's democratic identity. In a misleading campaign in the American media, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is attempting to present his plan merely as an adjustment that would align Israel more closely with other democracies. No serious legal figure in Israel believes this is true. Even if elements of the proposed changes may seem similar to practices in other democratic countries, as the government maintains, all of those democracies have powerful institutional checks and balances absent in Israel that limit unbridled executive or legislative power and protect individual rights. Israel has no formal constitution and no second legislature. It has no federal system or regional elections. The Prime Minister's plans effectively concentrates nearly all power in the hands of one person, the Prime Minister himself. This is no judicial reform, but a dramatic alteration that would bring Israel's governing system closer not to the US and Canada, but to Hungary and Turkey. In substance, the changes would remove the only effective brake on government power and profoundly weaken the only body capable of protecting citizens from the tyranny of a majority, protection that has never seemed more vital. And as Rabbi Rick Jacobs, president of the Union for Reform Judaism, put it, threats to Israel's democracy threaten Israel's standing in the global community of democratic nations. He said threats to Israel's democracy also threaten the well-being of the global Jewish people who confront growing anti-Semitism. In other words, Netanyahu is doing what Netanyahu does, only thinking about himself and his own power. But if this was only what was happening in Israel right now, Dayenu, it would be enough. But there is more. Over recent weeks, the amount of violence in Israel has increased, with attacks from terrorists on the rise. There was one just yesterday in Tel Aviv. It's upsetting. It was upsetting when last week a deadly shooting happened in the West Bank town of Huwara that killed 2 Jewish Israeli brothers. I believe strongly in no uncertain terms that Israel has the right to defend itself from terrorist attacks. Israel has a right to protect itself. However, we also have a moral duty to uphold as well. The two values, a right to defend and protect, and to do it with morality, should not and do not contradict one another, which is why I stood in horror after hours after the brothers Hallel and Yagel Yaniv were killed. Hundreds of Israeli settlers carried out a violent attack, rampaging through Huwara, burning homes and vehicles. It left 1 Palestinian dead, someone who had just come back from helping a relief effort in Turkey. It left 1 Palestinian dead, approximately 100 injured, and dozens of homes and vehicles torched. When commenting on what happened, the IDF commander of the West Bank, Yehuda Fuchs, called what the settlers did to Huwara a Jewish pogrom against the Arab residents. A Jewish pogrom against the Arab residents. To make matters worse, there is Israeli footage of settlers and soldiers singing and dancing as the town is being destroyed. They should not have allowed this to happen. Following the pogrom, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich openly declared that the Palestinian town of Huwara should be wiped out by the state of Israel. In the past, Smotrich has self-described himself as a fascist homophobe and has a long history of promoting dangerous and violent policies. The fact that Smotrich is a government minister who has just been handed significant responsibility for affairs in the West Bank makes his incitement even more dangerous. Smotrich has called gay pride parades worse than bestiality and supports laws that would strip rights from the LGBTQ communities and from women. He has expressed support for expelling Arab citizens of Israel who are seen as opposing the government, however he defines opposing the government would be, as well as demolishing Palestinian villages in the West Bank and evicting their residents. By the way, he also aims to do great harm to Jews around the world, including by changing the law of return in ways that would cease to recognize Jews who converted with Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist rabbis. What happened was deplorable. There was synergy. The settlers carried out the attack, the military secured it, and the politicians backed it. The Israel I love is Jewish, and it's also democratic. And when we see that democracy begin to erode, people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have the oxygen needed to burn through peace and prosperity. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's Minister of Security, and Smotrich eventually condemned the violence, but first said that they understood the rage of the people who committed the pogrom. Of course you understand the rage. I understand the rage. When I see the slaughter of Jews, I feel great rage. But like Rabin, we need to keep that rage in check for a greater purpose. What that pogrom was, that was Chilul Hashem, an act done in the name of God, but ultimately was a destruction of God, a desecration of God and God's Torah. Yes, we are commanded to wipe evil out from our midst, But what happened didn't do that. It was only the multiplication of evil. This is not about left or right. This is about upholding the moral credibility of the state of Israel. Yes, the terrorists who killed the brothers came from this town, but this doesn't mean that you wipe out the town. You do what they did later, which was a carefully planned operation to bring the brothers, killers, and planners to justice in a just manner. That pogrom, when I think about that and looked at the video of the soldiers and settlers dancing, I wondered, what would Rabin have said if he could have commented on what happened? I don't know what he would say, but I know what I believe, that this is not the time for us to walk away from Israel. We need to stand with other Reform, conservative, and Reconstructionist Jews who are protesting this regime. This is not a time for us to say that as American Jews, we need to focus only on America. This is a time to say that as Jews who are also Zionists, we need to care for our brothers and sisters in Israel who are working against the forces of darkness that are sweeping through a country that we love and that we care about. Now is not the time to walk away. Now is the time to double down and support the organizations in Israel that support our values. Now is the time to lift up our voices. When Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, he had this song in his pocket, Shir LaShalom, which he quoted during his final speech. You can find it on page 354. The song preaches to us that the purest of prayers will not bring us back. Bitter crying will not awaken or return those whose candle has gone out and who have been buried in the dust. It won't return anyone to us from dark pits. Here, neither joy of victory nor songs of praise will be any use to us. So just sing for peace. Don't whisper a prayer. It's far better to sing for peace. In one great shout, let the sun shine through the flowers. Don't look back. Leave that to pedestrians. Lift up your eyes in hope, not through gun sights. Sing a song of love, not war. Don't say the day will come. Bring the day. In every city, in every square, cry out for peace so they cannot escape that cry. Page 354.
תנו לשמש לעלות, לבוקר להאיר. הזעקה שבתפילות אותנו לא תחזיר. מי אשר קבע נורו ובעפר נטמן, בכי מר לא יאירו, לא יחזירו לכאן. איש אותנו לא ישיב, מבור תכלית אפל, כאן לא יועילו לו שמחת הניצחון ולא שירי הלל. לכן רק שירו שיר לשלום, אל תלחצו תפילה. לכן רק שירו שיר לשלום בצעקה גדולה. תנו לשמש לחדור מבעד לפרחים, אל תביטו לאחור, הניחו להולכים. שאו עיניים בתקווה, לא דרך כוונות. שירו שיר לאהבה ולא למלחמות. אל תגידו לום יבוא, הביאו את היום, כי לא חלום הוא בכל הכיכרות, הריעו רק שלום. לכן רק שירו שיר לשלום, אל תלחצו תפילה. לכן רק שירו שיר לשלום, בצעקה גדולה. שירו שיר לשלום, אל תלחצו תפילה. לכן רק שירו שיר לשלום, בצעקה גדולה.
Your voices are powerful. Use them for the force of peace. Use them to keep people accountable, and use them so we can't be ignored. Shabbat Shalom.